This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of 4.0 to Pro, your pocket-sized pickleball podcast. Where we teach you a single-shot strategy every single episode. I'm Michael O'Neill here in sunny Long Beach, California, joined by Mircea Marariu in Boca Raton, Florida. What's up, dude? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, my man. It's so good to be here after being couch-ridden, basically, for almost, 5 days. It was a little rough illness that I had, but it feels good to be on the other side, I'll tell you that.
Well, I'll tell you, if you're like me, it is full stir crazy mode because I am not a sitter-arounder in any capacity. I'm not a show binge watcher, so it just kind of drives me crazy when I'm sick like that.
Well, I became one this past several days. Oh, gosh.
Well, we are going to revisit dinking in 2025 because there's, again, been a ton of stuff that's changed since we started this show. But before we do anything, I have a major bone to pick, Mircea.
Yes, sir.
And if you hear me, I'm just going to slide my soapbox here. Now, I've been a full-time podcaster since 2013. My other show, The Solopreneur Hour, has over 10 million downloads and 850 plus episodes. I have spoken at pretty much every podcast conference there is. In fact, I'm speaking in Orlando in a couple of weeks at PodFest for, I think, the 10th time.
Wow.
So I know this podcasting industry really, really well. And I also know that of the pickleball podcasts, we are the only one that has ever hit the top 200 on the Apple Podcasts sports category, which is a
amazing.
BF deal. We were in front of Jim Rome, for crying out loud. And this show has hit that top 200 multiple times. We are the only pickleball podcast to have ever done that. And we've done it multiple times. Now, the other day, the DINK Awards were announced. And this is, we've got, the kitchen, we've got the DINK, which does a fabulous newsletter where they keep you up with all of the current pickleball news. And they have a thing called the 2024 DINK Awards. And for the second year in a row, we are not even on the list as one of the nominees of the best pickleball podcast. So I ask you, dear listeners, we are calling to arms. One of the things they've done this year is they've allowed a write-in vote. So you can go to dinkawards.com, and I want every single human listening to this show to go to dinkawards.com, and we're on the second page. You don't have to vote for anything else if you don't want to. So you go to dinkawards.com, you click vote, scroll all the way down, click next, and then one of the categories is Best Pickleball Podcast. The last selection is Other. You write your own podcast in. I want every single one of you guys to go on there and register 4.0 to Pro as your favorite pickleball podcast. I want to show them that we will no longer be snubbed for such voting, Mircea. And
thank you, sir.
Part 2 of my rant, one of the categories is the best senior pro player. The guy who won the men's doubles championship, won the NPL, and won the senior pro championship, won Mircea Marariu on this very show, not even nominated, not even one of the 5 guys on the list, which and that doesn't give you a write-in option, which is super annoying. That's it for now. That's as much as I'm ranting about this. You guys all go and vote, and let's show them, please, if you would be so kind.
Well, thank you for your rant, my man. I appreciate it.
Anyway, let's talk about dinks, dude. This could be an hour show because it is such a major part of pickleball. And it is, I want to say, it's one of the original techniques that probably came from the game in 1965 when they added the non-volley zone or the kitchen. It gave us this 140 square feet of safe space to drop a ball into. And over especially the last few years, it has really been used as a strategic advantage in a lot of different ways. Can you, from your perspective, talk about why dinking? Why is it important?
Well, it's one of the unique aspects of pickleball, if not the most unique. One of the major reasons that we're dinking is because we're able to, and we are able to because we cannot volley and step in, and we cannot step in and volley. So we can't do either of those things. So we need to let the ball bounce. So when you're able to make the ball bounce, hit something from low to high, which is, again, one of the most fundamental concepts that we've been trying to preach, is make your opponent hit up. So when you're able to do that, that's why you dink. And you dink to get a bunch of different outcomes. One, you try to be consistent. So you try to make your opponent hit an error. You want to make them hit something in the net or out wide, or you're trying to get a pop-up where you can crush the ball to the spot or body of your choice. And then the other thing is you want to get a dead dink, or a dink that you control where you can do something aggressive with it. Either attack, and attack can be speed up, or attack can be in another aggressive dink.
Well, we're ultimately trying to create offense, but we're able to do this in a very safe space. If you're a few feet off that non-volley zone, and you're able to actually get that ball to bounce in front of your opponent, it allows everybody, you and your teammate, to advance to that non-volley zone. And now you're in the game. Now you can really start strategizing with your teammate to either pull them out wide or do something. It allows you to start constructing points.
Absolutely.
So we're going to bang through this from a technique standpoint, because I think there's probably a few nuggets that many of us either are on the earlier side of 4.0, or that maybe if you're on the later side, if you're closer to 5.0 than 4.0 or closer to pro, then maybe there's a few things that will be refreshers. And if you are brand new and you'd love to be more consistent with your dinks, I think this next section will help you quite a bit. So one of the biggest things that you noticed, Mircea, is that dinking has become much more active versus quite passive as it was a few years ago. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. When I first started watching pickleball on YouTube, and I had literally just started playing, I noted how remarkably easy it seemed. And obviously these were high-level pros that I was watching at the time. But even back then, they were relatively passively dinking the ball back and forth with relative ease. Now, they had a lot of practice under their belt, and they obviously had a lot of skill. But over the coming years, I've noticed more and more how active dinking has become, and how active really needs to be your mindset when you are trying to advance from 4.0 to pro. And even from 3.0 up, that's really what you should be focusing on, is thinking about your dinking mentality being active. This will help with your footwork and help with your positioning, help with your preparation.
When you say active, do you mean like when your partner is dinking, you're moving, and vice versa? Like you're really trying to make sure you're positioned in the right place, you're prepared for whatever the next ball is?
Yeah, that as well, but you want to maintain an athletic stance, and that'll lead us into how we're going to do our early preparation. But yes, you want to be able to adjust to dinks that are coming from the other side, adjust to your partner's positioning. And in order to do that, you can't be stationary and passive. So one of the biggest mistakes I see it, you walk out to a random rec place somewhere and you watch sometimes people dinking, and they're just standing out there on the heels of their feet, and they're not moving very well, and they're missing dinks left and right or popping them up. And it's really because they're just not in the mentality to get prepared early, be active, be athletic. I mean, you have to prepare early, and you really need to have your feet with a little bit of a wide base, minimum shoulder width apart, ideally a little bit more. Knees want to be slightly bent. You want to feel the balls of your feet. And that's really, really important. I just drilled with this guy the other day that came down from Dallas, and really the easiest adjustment that we were able to make in his game, like right away, was that early preparation and athletic posture. He was a little too narrow. His base was too narrow. And so he was a little bit off balance quite frequently when we were dinking right away. So that was the first thing I saw.
Well, that's great of you to notice that, by the way. Well, let me take us through a little bit about that positioning stance. So you said feet are shoulder width, nice and wide. You're on the balls of your feet. Your knees are bent. We want the torso to stay relatively upright. We want to lean forward towards your opponents, but don't lean hard to the right and hard to the left to get these balls. You want to be bending your knees to go down to get the balls. The left and right movement is more of a shuffle. So you're not trying to cross your feet over, and you're not trying to turn 90 degrees and show your back to the opponent, because that can put you in a really bad spot. If someone goes wide on you and you physically turn to the left, let's say you're on the left-hand side and they hit a wide dink, you're in big trouble if they go back the other way. You've got to swing 180 degrees to get the ball.
Yeah, or if you pop it up and they attack you, if you've turned your hips, that's one of the things I always look for. If my opponent has turned their hips, especially if they're almost perpendicular in terms of their hips relative to the net, then I know that they're going to be off balance or have difficulty recovering, and I'm able to attack.
Well, one of the things, you and I are just about, I don't know how tall you are. I'm 5'8". So
I'm 5'10".
Okay, but neither of us are 6'4". And when you're playing against a really tall person and they're reaching out into the kitchen, man, does it narrow your target. Like, you really don't have a lot of real estate to play with in the non-volley zone. So one thing that I'll suggest to you guys is, even if you're not super tall, make sure you're right on that line. You can put your offhand behind you to counterbalance you, but really reach out into the non-volley zone, reach out into the kitchen, and take the balls out of the air if you can. If you want an unbelievable example of what this looks like, check out any Hayden Patriquin or Gabriel Tardio match. These guys are so good at really reaching out. Like, imagine fully extending their arm towards their opponents, and they're going to try to take every single ball out of the air. If they can't, or if it's too good, they will bail out and typically take a step back and hit a dink. But their mentality is 99%. Let me get this thing out of the air, because it has that lovely bonus, especially if you're a 4 or 5 player and above, of taking time away from your opponents. And that becomes one of the more critical things as you move up this duper ladder, if you will.
You're taking the time away. You're also minimizing their spin. So if they're really hitting very aggressive top spin or very slicey dinks, penetrating dinks, you're basically limiting their spin. You're hitting the ball back to them more quickly. And if you're able to set up a dink volley regularly, that's one of the first steps to really being able to attack seemingly unattackable balls. And we talked about this briefly on one of the last podcasts, is that if you're able to dink volley, especially if you ever dink volley a little bit over the net in the first half of the kitchen and make it bounce on the other side, it's very difficult for your opponents to attack that ball. And so you can do things like 1 or 2 dink volleys, and then the next ball, even if it's low, you can actually just hit a poke volley where you're poking it kind of up into your opponent's chest, and basically they lose it for half a second on the net cord, so you can start attacking below the net. And then you can also lob volley. So there's a bunch of different options, and it's really important that as a skill that you really want to develop as you're getting to the 5-0 and pro level.
Yeah, I was working on those today, actually, and they're coming along, I'll tell you.
Awesome.
So in terms of physical movement, the actual mechanics of you hitting the ball, this is something I teach a lot, especially because I've been doing these women's clinics here in Long Beach for the last couple months. One of the main things to remember as you are dinking and at the net is we want to eliminate variable. And anybody that's ever swung a golf club already knows how to do this, and they may not realize it. It's that straight arm you have when you are, so I'm a righty, so my left arm will be as straight as I can make it when I swing a golf club. And that's because I've got this teeny little face and this teeny little tangent of a hard ball that's got to hit this face. I've got to eliminate as much of the variable as I can, because if I tweak my wrist or tweak my elbow or break my elbow or bend it, that ball's going to go into the woods. And that is basically the same idea in pickleball. If you can set your paddle angle towards your opponent and then make your arm into a unit, make it into a lever, basically pivots from your shoulder, and that's what's moving. I'll tell you, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got, it was so early on in my pickleball career. Someone said, if you happen to have a cast that went from your shoulder all the way down to your wrist, you'd be the best dinker on court that day.
Yep.
And I loved that as a visual because I'll tell you, it's certainly for consistency. Now, as we move further down, again, the duper ladder, you're going to want to start introducing some wrist and things like that to get some spin on the ball. But if you just want consistency, you want Frankenstein dinks is what I call them. Just be like Frankenstein reaching their hands out and you will have a nice, consistent ball. So eliminate variable, use big muscles and not small. And what that means is shoulders and quads and not wrists and elbows. So if you find yourself playing and working on these with a drilling session and you find that your shoulder's a bit sore, you're probably doing it right. And it may be the first time you were doing it right because your shoulder's now a lot more active than it was when it was, when you were hitting with your elbow. You want to get low. You want legs to lift the ball. And you want to get that lift on the ball from your shoulder and your quads, lifting that ball over. I always like people to visualize how long can you keep that ball on the paddle? Can you push that paddle towards your opponent to get a nice, consistent dink? And then you'll start feeling it. You'll start feeling how flowy and almost rhythmic it is. So one thing that I don't think gets talked about quite enough is the actual path of the ball. And that when you watch a pro play, the apex of their dink is on their side of the net. It's not on the opponent's side of the net.
Exactly.
So we want to get the apex of our ball on our side of the net. We don't want the ball to be rising as it goes over the net because that ends up being a ball that can be attacked out of the air. So think about keeping your wrist firm and locked, especially on that backhand dink, where you might pronate your wrist towards you a little bit and keep that wrist nice and locked and sweep through under the ball with an open paddle face, which will elicit some natural backspin and allow you a nice controlled dink, which if that's all you got out of the deal, if the only thing you did is hit non-attackable controlled dinks, that would go very, very far in the pickleball world.
Absolutely. And I just want to piggyback a little bit on your path of the ball, which is a really important concept. Not only do you want it on your side, you want a nice arc to the ball and you want that apex on your side. The other thing is you talked about variability, and this is one of the other key concepts, is that the closer you get to the net in the non-volley zone, the less backswing and the less follow through that you should have. And this is key with dinking. And that was one of the hardest things for me to learn coming from tennis, is because we have these, these well-established strokes.
Grandiose
Exactly.
backswings, yeah.
Yes, it's these Federer-styled sweeps of, while they're great from the baseline, they're really not so great from at the kitchen and when you're dinking. So you want to limit your backswing to virtually none. You want to keep the ball in front of you. So you want to take the ball in front of you as much as you can, and you want to limit the backswing and then push the ball forward, and you don't want to decelerate. You want to accelerate through the swing path, but you don't want a giant follow through. Too much follow through and too much backswing is really one of the things that is going to increase your variability and increase your errors. The other thing is, if you have problems with popping the ball up or hitting it too hard, you really might have too strong of a grip. If you can think of a grip, and if you're gripping it as hard as you can, that's a 10 out of 10. You definitely want it about 3 or a 4 or less, depending on how you hit the ball and your swing mechanics. The other thing is you want to be economical with your footwork. You don't want to be running all over the line. You want to be taking short, small steps, and you want to maintain your balance, maintain that wide base, maintain the ball in front of you so you're able to take the ball in front of you. If the ball is at your feet, you can either pivot to give yourself a little bit more time, and I'm fine with people shuffling a little bit off the line and then letting the ball bounce, and that might be a little bit easier. If you do hit a good dink, make sure you get back up there, though. The biggest mistake that sometimes people make is they'll back up and then they'll hit a good dink, and then they'll watch it and they'll think, wow, I hit a really good dink. And then a pop-up would come back, and yet they can't attack it because they're 5 feet back from the non-volley zone line, and so they've wasted an opportunity. So you lose some opportunity cost. You really don't want to short hop dinks if you can, but a short hop or half volley dink is really a defensive dink. I've seen so often that 4-5 roughly or 4-0 level players, they'll take that half volley and they try to do something with it, meaning they try to hit it hard and it inevitably pops up or goes in the net. So if it's a half volley dink, it's fine. Just half volley gently with a little bit of an arc just over the net in that safe zone within the first half of the kitchen on the other side. One of the other concepts they also like to teach is that if you're in a dinking pattern and if you're going cross court and someone's hitting good slicey or top spinny dinks to your backhand, say, and you're going cross court, don't try to redirect the dink down the line off their really penetrating dink. You only want to redirect, meaning change the angle of the ball when you're in control of the dink. Otherwise, it really tends to pop up and you lose control very easily. So you want to keep the same pattern until you're able to change the direction unless you have a very easy dink that you can control.
Every morning as I'm on my way to the pickleball court, I do two things. I get my caffeine, because you need your caffeine, and I have my protein shake. And in my protein shake, I throw a scoop of AG1. My one scoop of AG1 gets me a multivitamin, vitamin C, super greens, probiotic, and vitamin B complex, which gives me tons of energy. It's the easiest way for me to eat healthy on the run. The cool thing is it doesn't even have to be in a protein shake. It tastes fantastic on its own. Just mix it with a bit of filtered water, gulp it down, and you have all of the exact same benefits. So this new year, try AG1 for yourself. It's the perfect time to start a new healthy habit, and that's why we are partnering with AG1. AG1 is offering new subscribers a free $76 gift when you sign up. You'll get a welcome kit, a bottle of D3K2, and 5 free travel packs in your first box. So make sure you check out drinkag1.com/402p to get this offer. That's drinkag1, the number 1.com/402p to start your new year on a healthier note. One of the themes we've had this whole time is communication. And a lot of times we've won points against other teams where the ball goes right in the middle and they don't communicate very well and they slap paddles together or something happens and they just haven't communicated well and they don't hit the right person doesn't hit the ball. So make sure, especially if you are the alpha on court, you are typically the left side player, or if you're a lefty righty combo, you've established who's going to run the show in that configuration. Make sure you're calling mine, yours, I'm here. Let people know where you are. We've talked about this a couple episodes ago where I was on the right side, Mircea was on the left side. I was taking some balls like a hockey stop that I shouldn't have been because he had more offensive options. So just make sure that you guys communicate really well. And look, if you end up being in one of those situations where you do whack paddles together or something, that's pure communication. The good news is it's easy enough to identify what the problem is. The hard part is sometimes getting people actually to pay attention to the dynamic of the game and actually let you take the ball, because sometimes people are very instinctual about those kinds of things. Strategically, Mircea, talk about being up and down in the point or neutral. Can you give us the Twitter version of what that means?
Yeah, I think this is a very important concept, especially when it comes to dinking. You're either up in the point or up in the rally, down in the rally, or it's neutral. And you can see this in the pro matches if you watch carefully enough. You can see who's up or down, or sometimes it's neutral. When you're up, meaning that you hit a good aggressive dink to someone's weaker side and that person can't really speed up or do anything offensive with it. So that's an example when you're up in the point. And the opposite when you're down in the point. If someone hits a really good dink to someone's backhand that's the weaker wing and that person can't speed up or they're out of position, then you and your partner are down in the point. The reason this is important is that you don't want to attack or hit aggressive dinks when you're all the way out wide and you're out of position or off balance, or your partner's way off balance, or your partner's been pulled off the court. You don't want to attack when you're in a position of weakness. You want to attack when you're either neutral or up in the point. When it's neutral is basically when neither side has advantage. The reason that I want people to pay attention and start thinking about this is because it's really the fundamental aspect of developing strategic locations to where you can get advantage for you and your partner. One of my longtime favorite partners was John Sperling. And one of the things he would ask me, he said, what are you trying to get out of that dink? And it seems like a simple concept, but it's really a higher level concept that when you hit a specific dink, what do you expect to happen? Sometimes people just dink to dink. I was just dinking to his backhand. Okay, well, what did you think would happen when you dink to that spot? And when you start to predict what happens and you start to see that these patterns emerge, that's when you're really starting to play the chess that we enjoy as part of pattern recognition at higher level pickleball.
Well, I love that because I will say that one of the real differentiating factors between watching high-level players and a rec play player, someone in the 4-0 to pro very often, is the example you gave, which is left side player gets pulled out really wide. So the other person hit a beautiful wide dink. It's not quite wide enough to ATP, so that's not there. But they're really scrambling and out of position to get that ball back. And I see like all the time them trying to hit like this super aggressive shot on the way back. And of course It goes into the net. Like there's no way it's not going in the net. And you see that against high level players, they readily accept that person hit a ball that has put them into some discomfort. And what they do, because they know they're behind, is they'll put up a gentle ball that's just inside the opposing team's Ernie ability, but it'll be towards the center of the court just so they can reestablish themselves back to neutral again. It's almost the only option you have at that higher level. And it's going to happen because, like something I'm going to talk about in the next thing, that two-handed roll dink, which is left side player to left side player, you can just put a ton of topspin on that ball. You can get it from really low and you can do a beautiful flick and it sends that ball super wide. You better have a way to combat that because it's not like a matter of if it's going to happen. It's definitely going to happen at this level that we're all playing at. People have that shot. So you better know how to bail out of it and save your point.
Exactly. And you can just think about, as a general rule, if you are pulled off the court, you want to so you're down in the point by definition. So your goal is to get back to neutral. So how do you do that? So the softer you hit it, and the further you hit it away from where you are, really, the more time you and your partner have to get back in the point. Now, of course, the longest distance would be way cross court, and you're often so out of position that it's really difficult to pull it all the way across court. But let's say I'm on the left side, I get pulled all the way out, and I hit a slice dink that is relatively soft that goes to the right side players towards his left foot or towards the middle, or I get a little back over to the left side player. That at least gives my partner and I enough time to reset our position and me to get back to where I need to be. So when you're in trouble, get back to neutral.
The other thing that I see quite often, Mircea, I would say more on the 4-0 side than the 4-5 plus. When that person gets pulled out to the left, for whatever reason, that right side player stays right where they are. And now you've got almost a full or a half court width for the opponents to hit. It's like this wide open thing, and the right side player doesn't cover middle. So burn this into your brains. Somebody has to be covering middle at all times. Whether one person gets pulled off the court or the other, just the angles dictate. And obviously the middle is the safest spot on the court. It's the lowest part of the net. Someone's got to be paying attention to that. And I think that very often players don't read their teammates enough. I think maybe initially we would say that you should be handcuffed in a way and you should be moving together left and right. I do think as you move further up the food chain that flexes a little bit because sometimes people are looking for bait balls where that left side player kind of puts one up and leaves the middle open for a second because they want it to look like the middle's open. And then they take one big step and nail it right back at you when you try to take advantage of that. But in general, let's try to clog that middle as much as we can.
Exactly. I'm glad you brought that up because while the left side player may have left a little bit of a space in order to kind of bait someone to going into that space can't be 20 feet. Meaning if you are on the right side and your partner's been pulled way out and you just stand there and don't scoot over to cover middle, it gives your partner too much space to cover even if they've tried to bait someone in that fashion.
Right.
So you want to narrow the amount of space they have to cover. That doesn't mean you go completely to the left side unless they're way out off the court.
Unless it's senior pro and they can't make it back.
Right, exactly.
It does happen a little bit.
So, it depends on how athletic the senior pro is. So,
right.
But
one-way street sometimes.
Exactly. So it depends who you're playing with. And obviously it depends on the skills of your partner. But I do want to think that most people want to follow their partner and try to limit the amount of space they cover. I call it narrowing the lane. We discussed in terms of returns. When you're the person up at the net already and your partner's returning, you want to narrow that lane. It's the same type of concept.
Well, let's talk about some advanced strategies to wrap this up, Mircea. Can you talk about full tracking versus half tracking and what it means and what are the advantages or disadvantages?
Well, basically, full tracking is when you're turning your head on a swivel and watching your partner hit the ball, and you're waiting for your partner to hit the ball. And after they hit the ball, then you go back and you start to look to see what your opponents are doing. So half tracking is where you're basically doing that to a point where you turn your head a quarter of the way, or you do turn your head fully and then you see they're about to hit the ball, or you can see generally where their position is. Then you quickly turn your head back towards your opponents so you can try to predict based on your knowledge of your partner, your opponent's body position and their reaction, so you're able to react more quickly. Most of us start off full tracking, and then as we get more comfortable with our partner, as we get more comfortable with the game, we start to practice the so-called half tracking.
So it's basically keeping it in your peripheral vision versus like fully turning your head and watching it. You're keeping an eye out on it. What you're really looking for at a higher level is what your opponent is about to do with the ball that your teammate is hitting.
Exactly. The advantage is that you're able to attack better and defend better. If I'm just watching my partner hit the ball and then I turn my head and my partner has, let's say, for example, sped up cross court, by the time I turn my head, either the ball is coming towards my chest or has already passed me by to my left side. So you really want to try to improve your decision-making and ability to react to defense and both offense as much as you can. So half tracking is one way of doing that.
So left side versus right side, we touched on this a little earlier, but I think the preference is to let the left side player, assuming you're both righties, let them dictate the point, because they can go to the right, they can go to the middle, they can go to the left pretty easily, versus the backhand of the right side player. I mean, obviously, if you're doing cross-court dinks forehand to forehand, which you see a ton in mixed doubles, in fact, if you are a female listening to the show and you play a lot of mixed doubles, you should be drilling that forehand dink cross court a ton, because it is really a thing. And then that backhand counter, because those are the shots that you're going to be seeing the most. So I think having an understanding of what are my responsibilities on this side, if you're going to play left side, got some responsibility to start moving the ball around and start trying to hit the different targets that you and your partner have talked about. The one thing I'll say about this is avoid the hockey stop. If you're on the right-hand side, we've talked about this a little bit in the last couple of weeks, which is that stab to the backhand side of the right side player to get a ball, because that ball was going to an easy forehand for the left side player versus a very difficult low backhand for the right side player. So just know that there's a rhythm and a protocol to it that will put you guys in a more advantageous position to win the point.
If you are off balance, if you're on the right side and the ball is coming from the left side of your opponent and you are on the right side and is coming to your left foot or your backhand, and you are going to hit a defensive shot, it's below the net, it's a soft shot, and your partner hasn't been pulled out completely, your partner is there with an ability to hit an offensive shot with their forehand. So you leave that ball for them.
Now, a lefty-righty combo changes a little bit.
Yep.
Sometimes you can respect the X, meaning if the ball is going diagonally to a particular person, let that person get the ball, because they now have just as much of an offensive advantage as you do with that forehand. So it all comes from communication. You guys have to communicate that. There's a ton of advantages to having a lefty-righty on court, but there's also some communication disadvantages that you guys have to overcome to take advantage of those lefty-righty combos.
So, with respect to some of the terms that people push around, pardon the pun, but push dinks, lift dinks, dead dinks, basically, a push dink would be a more aggressive dink, something you're controlling with slice and spin and hopefully some sort of intentional direction. A lift dink is a more defensive dink, and you're basically trying to just place the ball. A more common type of lift dink is when they dink straight ahead, whereas if you're hitting a cross-court, two-handed backhand aggressive dink, then you're hitting more of a push dink. And then the dead dink is something that your opponents can completely control and do almost anything with, either speed up or hit an aggressive dink to any spot. So you want to generally avoid the dead dinks. The biggest, I think, misconception is that you want to avoid them at all costs. And I don't agree with that, especially if you get a good dink that's just a little bit over the net and it lands in the first half of the kitchen on the opposing side. I really find those, for example, with a volley dink, and you just push it a little bit over, and those are low enough for the most part that your opponent has difficulty attacking them. Or if they do attack them, you know that it's coming from low to high. So a dead dink for me is a little bit further, and it's a little bit more towards the non-volley zone line, and that can be a problem. And obviously you particularly want to avoid dead dinks to a player's strength. One of the other concepts that we should consider is the safe zones, the danger zones, and then the target zone. So one of the targets might be someone's weaker dinking wing, which is often the backhand. Some people, it's the forehand. So figure out where is a target. Another target that we really talked about well is the left foot of the right side player. That's an excellent target. So pick your targets, find what your safe zones are. So the safe zone is a dink where one of your opponents can't hurt you, and then figure out what the danger zones are. And a good example of a danger zone is giving Pickleball or giving Gabe Tardio a fluffy, juicy forehand dink and letting them do a dead dink and letting them do whatever they want. So figure out what the danger zones are. And that's one of the really important things that I want people to go out and execute is practice recognizing what those zones are for your opponents and practice predicting what will happen with a particular dink and notice patterns. There are some pro players that you will, if you watch carefully, there's one particular pro player that dinks two backhand dinks cross court. The next backhand dink is up the line. Two cross court, then one up the line. So it's amazing what patterns emerge when you're paying attention. So that's one thing we want to do is recognize what our opponents are doing. So that's one thing I want people to work on this week.
I had a great drill session today for really about an hour, and all we did is dink. That was the entire drill session. There were some things I wanted to work on. You and I talked on last show or the show before about that roll volley dink from the left-hand side where you sort of mask where the ball is coming from between the net cord tape, the net tape. Mm-hmm. You can kind of hide it and speed a ball up, not super hard, but kind of high. And it's this lovely surprise attack, especially on the left-hand side. So I wanted to work on that, but we did a ton of backhand dinks. And I'll tell you, drilling really does make a difference. We started out, and I'm hitting the net, hitting the net. Then I found my rhythm, and I had these lovely backhand dinks, switched to forehand every once in a while, and it eventually ended up where I was blending my straight-armed backhand slice dink, my controlled dink that I can put wherever I need to, and then a two-y topspin dink that I could put some pressure in, push them a little bit, also with some good targeting. But I was able to blend between the two really seamlessly, and much harder to do that in a game if you don't drill that stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
So drilling, all we did is we started straight across from each other and just dinked straight ahead for a while. Then we just literally did backhand to backhand cross court, forehand to forehand cross court. And then we went back to backhand, and that allowed us to both mix up our slices and our top spins. And that was it. And then we started playing, and I felt great today. My dinks were on point today. So drill them as much as you can.
Yeah, one of my favorite drills is really called dinking across the line, where one player is on one side, and then you have one player on the other side, or two players on the other side. And the one player, will be the focus of the drill, is basically moving all the way across both sides of the court. And they can only dink to one particular spot. So let's just say you're dinking to the right side, and I'm on the left side, you're on the right side across from me. So you can dink anywhere to my right side of the court to the left side, and I'm just moving back and forth. And obviously, you're not trying to hit winners. You're trying to move them as much as possible, but it really helps.
Are you going from one side to the next?
Yes.
Like, are you moving and you stop and you go back the other way, or you can just go wherever?
You can go wherever. So if you're the subject of the drill, if you will, and I'm on the left and you're on the right, so we start off that way. So I'll dink one to your forehand, then I'll hit one over to your backhand towards the left side, then I'll hit one all the way cross court, then I'll hit another one cross court, and then I'll hit one straight ahead, then one in the middle. And so you're moving all over, and I'm trying to keep you off balance. But we want to maintain the point as much as possible, but it puts you in stressful situations. So it allows you to improve your footwork during times of stress. And it's not an easy drill. It really, it was one of the first drills I started doing with JW, and it was really, really tough. So it's something that it also works on your cardiovascular strength.
All right, guys. So take all of this and dink your life away. Mircea, thank you as always, sir.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it. Have a great week.
You have now just listened to another episode of 4.0 to Pro. As always, thank you guys for listening. And if you can, make sure you hop on over to dinkawards.com and put a vote in for your boys there, will you? Much appreciated. Please go enjoy the pickleball courts, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to 4.0 to Pro. For more tips, find us on Instagram at 4.0 to Pro. If you have a pickleball question, submit it at picklehelp.com. Now, get out there and dominate. But don't forget to have fun.